This is Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess and Jamal.
And this is Jamal Dajani.
Well, guess what? To our Arab Talk listening audience, we are speaking with co-host Jamal Dajani live from Greece. We're doing our show, our typical show here at KPOO in San Francisco. But we're speaking with Jamal live from his undisclosed location in Greece, where he is the sole Arab Talk reporter in Greece right now. So, Jamal, give us a little update, an Arab Talk update of what's happening in Greece. Actually, quite a bit has happened in Greece just in the last couple of days.
Well, a couple of course, important stories. One is the elections, which I'll come back to it later on. But today, something really weird happened actually yesterday in the north of Greece, in Salonika. And maybe this is a wake-up call or a reminder to President Trump about, global warming that he seems to be in denial of. But out of the blue, they've had a hurricane.
A hurricane in Greece?
A hurricane, yeah, a kind of like a quick hurricane in Salonika. It's unheard of. I don't know when it ever happened, if any. And it killed, unfortunately, 6 tourists, mostly in a resort and in a hotel, and a Greek fisherman. So seven people died. A Greek fisherman was lost at sea, and then 6 tourists just died because a tree fell on a hotel, and others died from debris and flying objects. It just caused a quick destruction, and more than 20 people were injured. So it was like, really, people are surprised, like the news. People are talking about it. People are shocked because this is, as you know, the tourist season.
Right.
It's in the middle of the summer. They've had a heat wave. All of Europe had a heat wave here. And this happened just for one day, and it disappeared. So this is really unprecedented, I would say. And of course, scientists, when something like this happens, they'll talk about global warming, that we're going to see events like this happening in different parts of the world. So that's kind of like out of the blue, strange story that happened in the past 24 hours.
But in terms of, I've never heard of the hurricane in Greece, but there is a political hurricane that's going on in Greece right now. And since you've been in Greece, there has been an election, and I believe 2 things. Not only does Greece have a new prime minister, but that prime minister appears to be leaning much more towards the conservative nationalistic inclinations that are sweeping Europe in general. How would you let our listeners know about the recent Greek elections, Jamal?
Well, yeah, obviously there was a landslide victory for the center-right New Democracy Party. So voters in Greece have given Kyriakos Mitsotakis, center-right New Democracy Party, a resounding mandate to form a new government after it won by landslide over the incumbent left-wing Syriza party, which has been in power since 2015. And the strange thing also, I was also in Greece here when the Syriza party came into power. Yeah. I would say during the election time, first I was in Athens, then another part of it. It didn't seem like they've had a major election campaign, like where you have masses of people, like for example, in the center of Athens and at Syntagma Square. They set up the Syriza party had a stage right in the center there, and music playing and speakers, whatever, but it didn't give an impression of like a huge kind of like elections as we've seen when they came into power. I could be wrong, but that's my impression. But anyway, with 91% of the vote, basically, when they've counted the last results, 91% of the vote, I guess there are other ballots coming maybe from people serving in the military or something like this. They won, and
was it significant?
they received. They get 39.7%.
Okay.
Of the votes compared with 31.5% for the Syriza. So the Syriza, of course, the former prime minister conceded, and in a way, kind of, he's been in power just for the past couple of days. Now he kind of faced his first test with this which even they call it an emergency. I mean, it's a major emergency with this hurricane.
Oh, wow.
That's just like, after 2 days, coming into power.
Right. So Jamal, just, we've been talking about this on Arab Talk. There are pockets in Europe of this emerging right-leaning nationalist kind of sentiment. It's also related to the Brexit that's happening in the UK right now, the Brexit process, and many people have said that it's a manifestation of, in part, what brought Donald Trump into power too. This kind of nationalistic, anti-immigrant kind of fervor that is, sweeping Europe and brought Donald Trump to power. Is your sense, speaking with Greeks on the street, the people that you've interacted with, that this represents a political shift? Because the Greek populace, the population in Greece has typically been more left-leaning in terms of their politics. Is there a big change in Greece now?
Well, I mean, it is definitely a change, but it's more complicated than this. I mean, there were many other factors why, Tsipras basically lost. But talking about the shift into kind of like the major right, for example, the fascist party in Greece, it's which is basically called the Golden Dawn.
The Golden
and
what?
That's the Golden Dawn.
Oh, really?
DAWN. Yeah, that's the fascist party, and this is the party which is anti-immigrant. Leaning, that's what they label it, as a fascist party. It did not garner more than, it actually got less than 3%, so did not qualify.
Oh, really?
So if they were leaning way to the right, these members would have kind of gained more seats in the parliament, but they actually didn't get. They got less than 3%. So the New Democracy, they refer to it as a centrist in a way.
I got it.
Not, in comparison with the Golden Dawn party.
So what do you think it was that turned this election towards the center right, away from the center left? I mean, we know economically.
Well, there were.
Yeah.
Talking to my Greek friends, there were too many promises made by Tsipras. He didn't deliver on these promises. Also, there were shifting alliances. The Greeks are always nervous. They have kind of course, as you know, a rivalry going on between them and Turkey, and they feel there's a threat, when it comes to Turkey. And so, for one thing, I know that Tsipras was criticized by some of his former ministers because he started this whole rapprochement with Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, and people say, well, he had to do it because of shifting alliances and for strategic reasons, because of the threat with Turkey, but others because historically Greece, both the people and its government, have been very pro-Palestinian.
Has that changed?
So as of recently,
has that changed?
As of recently, I would say with the people, but definitely with the government, because Greece have signed agreements with Israel. They've had military exercises between the Greek Air Force and the Israeli Air Force. So I don't know how this will play under the new government, but that's definitely was a change as far as a political change in the region. But also, of course, Tsipras won because of the economy, and he promised people that he was going to change things. If you remember, in 2014, 2015, Greece was on the verge of collapse economically. Right. I mean, and its debt kept mounting and mounting, and they kept borrowing and borrowing. Some people have been saying that things have been improving a little bit as far as the number of, maybe the unemployment has dropped a little bit. People are feeling a little change. And then, but the negative aspect of this, they've been using more credit cards when they've been paying. So you're seeing maybe they're falling more into personal debt, right?
Well, the other thing that I was going to ask you about the changing political dynamics, Jamal, is that just within the last few months, speaking of Turkey, Prime Minister Erdogan has made a pretty significant shift away from allegiances with the United States and is moving closer to Russia. And I don't know if that's playing at all into what's happening in Greece at all.
I don't know. All I know is that they usually they feel threatened because Erdogan also from time to time makes threatening remarks towards Greece and as far as territory and so forth like this, even though both Greece and Turkey are members of NATO. So that's another thing to take into consideration. But maybe some people have been saying that Tsipras made that political maneuver to get closer to Netanyahu because he probably thinks if you're closer to Israel, then you'll become closer to the United States just in case.
Just in case.
They face that threat from Turkey.
Okay, one last question before we move on to Palestine and the Middle East and some domestic politics here in the States. I want to ask you about the Syrian refugee and African refugee crisis that, as typical for our news cycle in the digital era of social media, it was a big item, obviously, last year, but it dropped from the news cycle, and we don't hear much about Syrian refugees, African refugees coming into Greece anymore. It used to be that Greece, and specifically some of the Greek islands, like Lesbos, for example, became staging grounds for the mass exodus of Syrian and African refugees, which then tried to, make a life for themselves somewhere in Greece or use Greece as a staging point to get to Europe. What can you tell me, if anything? Are you seeing refugees anywhere when you were in Athens? And what's the status?
You know what, you're right. Kind of the focus on the refugees has dropped, and visibly speaking, I know that in the years, like a couple of years ago and whatever, you could see it all over the place. But now they're probably, I'm not seeing as many refugees in Greece, but this doesn't mean anything because I've only been to a couple of places, which is really Athens and the Peloponnese, but it was more visible as far as people in the streets and in the media. It doesn't mean anything. It could have shifted somewhere else, but I know for a fact that still many of the refugees still come through Turkey into Greece, but they all, even from the beginning, they've had one goal in mind because they know that Greece cannot provide. I mean, they don't have employment. They're struggling here with their own, employment issues. So all the refugees probably they just focus on either moving, traveling north towards Germany and Sweden and Norway. So they don't stay here for long.
So but visually, in terms of what you observed in Athens, for example, you're not seeing mass.
No, it's less visible. It could be many factors. Also, you have the elections, and
right,
and so the focus is on this. They could have been now kind of held, prevented from maybe coming to Athens, or they have the different way, kind of transitioning from places like, as you've mentioned, Lesbos, and going directly into Europe, because they just want to move north where they can, where number one people are, where they can find employment really, more than anything else, and some aid, and Greece cannot provide this. They can provide the basics.
Right. We're speaking with Arab Talk co-host Jamal Dajani live from Greece. He's our Arab Talk correspondent and reporter in Greece right now. We'll be hearing from Jamal over the next few weeks as he gives us the Arab perspective from Greece. So, Jamal, I want to shift gears a little bit, because now that you're, in Europe right now, a couple of interesting things have happened domestically, and they do relate to what's happening in the Middle East and in Palestine. In case you haven't noticed, there's been a arrest and charges brought against well-known pedophile and sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Now, for our listeners who may not know all the details, some 10 years ago, he was convicted of soliciting prostitution, got a sweetheart deal in Florida where he had to spend 13 months in jail, but was allowed to leave every day and just go to his office and then come home and sleep. And this is after, basically well-known facts that he had sexually assaulted young girls as young as 13 and 14 years old. He got a sweetheart deal from the U.S. Attorney, Alex Acosta, who's now the Labor Secretary for Donald Trump. Well, the Southern District in New York, the federal court, has now charged Jeffrey Epstein with sex trafficking and a number of other charges. He's in jail right now. And the list of people that Jeffrey Epstein has associated with over the years reads like a who's who in terms of people who've also been, very supportive of Israel. The two notables, for example, Alan Dershowitz, which we'll talk a little bit about in a minute here, who was also Jeffrey Epstein's attorney for a while, but also notably on the list, Jamal, was former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who was known to hang out with Jeffrey Epstein and fly on a number of his private jets. I don't know how that story is playing in Europe and in Greece right now, but this story here, in terms of the domestic issues, is really huge.
Well, it's playing actually. I mean, I don't know how actually it's playing here. I mean, it's in the news. I've been reading about it, but mostly I've been focusing on how it's playing in the Israeli media. And this is a big story in the Israeli media. I mean, of course, as you've mentioned, the Epstein, the billionaire, and he's also, by the way, a registered sex offender. This is not something new, and he just got arrested this week, which, by the way, I read that his lawyer was attempting to get him out free on bail, and I said in my thing, this should be a no, because he is a risk to flee to Israel.
That's right.
Because, you're making that connection, and people say, well, why are you saying this? Well, I'll tell you why. Because he has a strong connection, a political connection to Israel. In fact, he partnered with former Prime Minister Ehud Barak to invest in his startup company. And this is all over the Israeli media. In 2015, Ehud Barak set up a limited partnership in which he's the sole shareholder, right? and that company invested in Forty Homeland Security, which was established in 2014, right? Yeah. And then it changed its name. It's something like there's a lot of weird things going on. Then it changed its name from reportee Homeland Security into Carbon with CARBYNE. And so the company develops call handling and identification capabilities, and things like this, security-related items. Ehud Barak, is the chairman of Carbon.
Okay.
And his personal investment in the company totals millions of dollars. I don't know where he came up with the millions of dollars, because they don't pay politicians in Israel tons of money. But nevertheless, he has a major investment there. And then now we're finding out that Epstein financed a considerable part of the investment, thus becoming a partner in the project. So now we know that the money that Barak has came from Epstein.
Well, that's interesting.
This is, so one of the company's directors is Pinchas Bukris, the Director General of the Defense Ministry during Barak's tenure as Defense Minister. Gets really all this web of connections that you have. So all of a sudden, Barak has millions of dollars. Epstein is a partner. Even though Barak is a former prime minister, he still is a very powerful man in Israel.
And is also playing. He's also playing a part in the election, in the formation of the parliament right now that Netanyahu is struggling with, and we have those snap elections coming up in September, October, whatever, because it's unclear whether or not Netanyahu will be able to form the parliament. But Netanyahu has been throwing Ehud Barak under the bus for his association.
Yes. Exactly. So he's been saying this because also Ehud Barak made several trips to the United States. And as you know, Epstein has his mansion in Florida, and he has his another mansion or townhouse in Manhattan. And so
and a private island.
According to the media, he stayed there many times. And this is where we get from the original investigation, which ended up in a plea deal just recently. And state rather than federal charges. Florida authorities found that Epstein paid dozens of girls as young as 14 or 15 years of age. Some of them are runaways or foster children for sexual services. Between 1999 and 2005, this is just like the tip of the iceberg. I watched yesterday, you might have watched this, I watched a very disturbing and sad interview with this young lady.
Yeah, I saw that.
And she talked about her experience when she was 14 years of age and how she got recruited, basically. And eventually, she was raped. Right. So that she was, I think, on Newsday, the show, talking about her ordeal. I think she was very brave, and she was talking about how she didn't tell her parents, didn't report it to the police, she felt ashamed, and this was the first time really publicly speaking about it, even though she told some of her friends there. So it's a
but Jamal, wait a minute.
Big mess for Epstein, Ehud Barak, and let me just finish one more thing.
Oh.
Your friend Alan Dershowitz was also interviewed, and he said, yes, I received a massage in his house, but I remained in my underwear.
Well, let me...
And the person who gave me the massage was a grown-up, not an underage, but I remained in my underwear, and I didn't see any wrongdoing. And had I seen any wrongdoing or young girls, I would have reported it, blah, 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 blah.
Okay, well, let's just continue with Alan Dershowitz, because I'll tell you what the young girl who was part of that incident is alleging, because there's a woman at the time, young girl, who is suing Alan Dershowitz, who's part of the lawsuit, who claimed that Jeffrey Epstein paid her as an underage girl, solicited her to have sex with Alan Dershowitz. And she has sued Alan Dershowitz for sexual assault and rape of a minor. So, and Alan Dershowitz attempted to sue her back for defamation and all these things. It turns out that Alan Dershowitz, he's a well-known attorney, forgot the fact that when you file something like that, you open yourself up to discovery, which means her lawyers were then able to were obligated and, could get all of Dershowitz's records. When he realized that, apparently he has put that countersuit on claim. Net, this is what we know. Dershowitz and Epstein are close personal friends. Dershowitz has been on Epstein's flight, and people have referred to these flights as pedophile flights because it's been well known or articulated that men go on these flights with Epstein in order to procure and basically sexually assault underage girls. And unfortunately...
And when you talk about the flights, you're referring to his private jet, the Lolita Express.
The Lolita Express, and that name is not random. He has a private island that Dershowitz has been to. That island is referred to as Pedophile Island. So it seems like Mr. Dershowitz is in a whole heap of trouble. The fact that he issued the statement saying that he had his clothes on and the woman was an older woman is interesting because for years he's been denying anything whatsoever. It seems like Mr. Dershowitz is in a bit of trouble. Now, we want to be equal opportunity critics because, yes, Alan Dershowitz, Ehud Barak, yeah, but let's not forget about Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were dear friends for many years. In fact, there's this legendary story, Jamal, which was confirmed by two people independently, that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein had a private party at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump's private club, with just the two of them and 24 girls to entertain them. That's what we know about. And
and then you're talking about Dershowitz, by the way, and this Lolita Express.
Yeah.
Someone now pulled, as you know, you have to maintain a flight log.
Right.
Dershowitz, who of course was Epstein's former attorney, appeared on the Lolita Express flight log 11 times.
Okay. So
this is new, and then one of the victims, this is the victim I was talking about, who was interviewed, is another victim. But in 2015, the victim that you were talking about, her name is Virginia Roberts Guiffer.
Yeah.
She filed a lawsuit against Epstein, claiming that he recruited her as a sex slave at the age of 15, sexually abusing her for years in his private jet and his various residences in New York, New Mexico, Florida, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And then he was kind of passing her around to his friends, and she named Dershowitz. This is how it came in the picture. And this is the lady he basically filed a motion against her in 2015, and he started tarnishing her reputation. The motion saying, she's of course a gold digger, she's trying to make some money, and her testimony had, she was, at the time, by the way, she was referred to as Jane Doe number 3.
Right.
Until recently when she was interviewed, now we know her name, and this is what she said. She said, on a couple of occasions I was on his plane, and let me see. And she basically said, she slept with Dershowitz when she was 16.
Okay.
Basically.
Underage.
Underage.
She's claiming that she was sexually assaulted by Alan Dershowitz as a minor. So here we have Alan Dershowitz, Jamal, deep defender of Israeli apartheid and war crimes, deep defender of Jeffrey Epstein and and his sexual assaults and pedophilia. I think Alan Dershowitz may have to spend some time defending himself now, because it seems like Alan Dershowitz, Jamal, is in a lot of trouble.
He has been defending himself. That's why, for the first time, he's talking about receiving. Why do you go to his mansion to have a massage?
Well,
when he says, I stayed in my clothes. And then he ends his interview. It's a funny interview. And says, I actually don't like massages. I mean, you should see that interview. It's a real funny interview.
Well, it's
so inconsistent.
It sounds.
I'm actually surprised he started to talk about this, because he's been always in denial.
Right. It seems like Mr. Dershowitz is having a bit of a problem right now. This is Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco. We're at 89.5 FM. We're broadcasting live from San Francisco, our San Francisco studio. We're also speaking with Jamal live in Europe right now, in Greece. And we'll be posting the show later on all of our streaming media. It'll be posted on Facebook. It'll be posted on YouTube and on our website, ArabTalkRadio.com.
And hey, talking about Bill Clinton, he had been on the plane 12 times. I'm looking at a report, from the log of those flights. So Bill Clinton shows up 12 times on the log on the plane. You have other names like Kevin Spacey.
Right.
He has been, we know the story of Kevin Spacey. He has been also on the plane. Chris Tucker. All these different names, showing up on that Lolita Express that we now know what was it all about.
And it turns out also from the indictment, Jamal, that Jeffrey Epstein had 11 different phone numbers that he used to call Donald Trump when they were close buddies. So for Donald
Trump threw him under the bus, as you know.
Of course.
Because recently he said, I never kind of liked him,
That's right. He was never, what did he say? I mean, he used his typical remark when he wants to distance himself. But again, we see this kind of pattern emerging. Men in power, sexually assaulting, abusing, using their power to take advantage, to assault and to traumatize young girls, underage girls. And it's Jeffrey Epstein, it's Alan Dershowitz, it's all of these people in power. And now and as you said, and I think it's a good point, Jamal, when we draw the connection with pro-Israel supporters and with Israel, we're saying that because, there's the real chance that if Jeffrey Epstein is let out, his first destination would probably be to try to escape to Israel, where he would attempt to, get away from being extradited. So we hope that he's not granted bail.
That's right. So we're going to move on to another story, for what has been in the news is, I don't know if you saw that, Jess, but this is, Benjamin Netanyahu has been on a Twitter tirade, just like Donald Trump, tweeting about different things, but recently started to tweet because archaeologists have found in Ashkelon or Ascalon. This is, by the way, it's an old town founded by the Philistines,
but it's an old
on the Mediterranean coast,
and it's an old Palestinian town.
Yeah, and the Philistines have basically founded many of these towns. Jaffa is included, Akka is included, and so forth. So they found in that site a burial site and conducted DNA. And then Benjamin Netanyahu goes on tweeting different tweets, starting by saying, a new study of DNA recovered from an ancient Philistine site in the Israeli city of Ashkelon, that's what we call it, confirms what we know from the Bible, that the origin of the Philistines is in southern Europe.
So what's he trying to say, Jamal?
No, and so he goes on, so basically saying that Palestinians, if they claim that they are descendants of the Philistines, which we know that Palestinians can claim many things. They are descended of the Canaanites, the Philistines, Arabs, of course, coming there, different civilizations, the Byzantines and whatever. That they are newcomers because, the Jews were there before. So he's using this DNA trope basically to, challenge the Palestinians' identity, right?
And challenge Palestinians' their indigenous claim to their land. I mean,
So of course, a lot of people have been answering him, but most importantly, archaeologists on Twitter, they started tearing down Netanyahu's claim that Palestinians have no connection to Palestine, their homeland. And, of course, the Philistine/Palestinian debate has been brought up to the front again, this time by him. People are questioning the timing and whatever, linking to a new Israeli study of the DNA collected from an ancient Philistine site, as I've said, in Ashkelon coastal region. And, he came under a lot of attack, basically. And it's not, by the way, a new discovery. I mean, this is really weird because we've been talking about it. It's, for many years, people know that the Philistines, they may have came into the coast of Palestine from Crete, right? But this was kind of the norm because they were seafaring people, just like the Phoenicians,
right,
and other civilizations. So the whole coastal area, people were traveling, they were trading, they were intermarrying, and so forth. And so for him, he's like, oh, this is Europe. So Palestinians are Europeans, so they don't belong there, basically, which is really funny. And this is where the archaeologists came and started to basically tutor him about history. For one thing, during those times, there was no Europe and Asia and whatever. I mean, these are modern day terminologies, the continents and so forth. But, so this is not how you track civilizations from that time.
But Jamal, but isn't Mr. Netanyahu from New York and Belarus? He's from New York he's from Belarus, but from New York via Belarus, right?
Well, here is the funny thing. Of course, if we talk about Mr. Netanyahu's original name is Mileikowsky.
Mileikowsky?
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, his father changed his name. His father was born in Warsaw in Poland.
Okay, so from Poland.
And his grandfather was born in Belarus.
Okay.
So the name's origin, I used to think it was from Poland because but actually someone wrote me on Facebook and said, and I think the lady who's on my Facebook page, she's originally from Poland, and she said, Mileikowsky is not a Polish name. It's either Russian or from Belarus. So I dug deeper and I found out his grandfather is from Belarus.
Okay.
Via Poland.
Well, Mr. Netanyahu, I mean,
and so now he's questioning, the Philistines moving few miles across the Mediterranean Sea, and he's all the way from Belarus, talking about the DNA. So I say to Mr. Netanyahu, I challenge him to provide a DNA test. I challenge him. If he provide a DNA test and show how much European he has in his DNA versus Middle East. I'm not even saying Palestine or Israel, just the neighborhood. What's the percentage of European and Eastern European? Okay. As you know, like he can pay $100 and get a DNA test from 23andMe and whatever.
Jamal, I'm going to up the ante on that bet with Mr. Netanyahu. We will tell Mr. Netanyahu that you and I are willing to release our DNA records to him anytime as soon as he releases his, and we'll have a nice discussion about all of these issues. How's that?
Well, and the other thing is, if he's interested, he should read the article by Gideon Levy, who published an article, I think less than a month ago, talking about his DNA, because Gideon Levy, the famous Israeli journalist who writes for Haaretz, I don't know if you read that article,
I didn't read it,
but
no.
he wrote a very interesting article. And he wrote an article, he went like everyone else, and he was curious about his origins. And if you read it, it's really very interesting. And then so he basically conducted his DNA, and both his parents are Ashkenazi Jews. And so he said, I just wanted to know. And he said, for one thing, I'm just paraphrasing here, he said, that test verified that I'm 100% Ashkenazi Jew, which I knew. My mother, I don't know where she came from, but it's somewhere either, I think he was half like from Poland and the other half from another Eastern European country. I could be wrong, but certainly from there, 100%. And then he said his DNA went, how they break it into different eras,
right.
Past 200 to 300 years, 500 to 1,000, so forth. And he said that according to his DNA, it's 100% Eastern European. And even if you traced it all the way, going all the way back, I don't know how many, 1,000 years or whatever, he said his ancestors did not even come close to Palestine. They did not come close to Palestine or that whole region to even view it through binoculars if they had, that was his words. And he said, just really confirmed that I'm 100% European, and Eastern European, both on my father's side, both on my mother's side, and his parents were diehard Zionists, and he said, kind of shattered my Zionist dreams, but this is the reality. We're here, but this is not what I was taught when I was young. But now I know, in a scientific way, and from the Middle East. So he should read his article, and I think this is one of the reasons that Netanyahu kind of triggered that thing and tried to kind of throw that in the mix to kind of confuse people.
So that's Gideon Levy's article in Haaretz. Do you have the date if our listeners want to go read it, Jamal?
I'll kind of.
Can you post it on your Facebook page?
Or say something about it, because I think I posted it, but it's within this past month. He posted it, which is and then like I said, from a anthropologist and archaeologist, they were laughing at Benjamin Netanyahu, who's making that kind of preposterous claim, and it's really a racist claim in a way. I mean, this is a very racist claim, trying to discredit Palestinians and say stupid things when that he himself and his family are immigrants from Eastern Europe, and many of the Israelis now, and trying to say like who has a claim to the land, because if you claim but Palestinians, like I said, if you look at most Palestinians in the region, they're a mixture of people. By now, and we have Palestinians from the time of, they were the first Christians, so from the time of Jesus Christ, when people spoke Aramaic. And then when the Arabs came in the 7th century into Palestine, when Khalifa Umar al-Khattab, there were Palestinians living there.
Hello.
And they were under the Byzantines. And there were intermarriage, and there were Christian Palestinians, and some of them converted to Islam, and some didn't convert to Islam. So what is he talking about? He's has this fantasy.
Well, I think he has a delusional, racist fantasy, that's why he should read Gideon Levy's article, because Most likely, if Mr. Netanyahu were to come clean with his own history, he might be facing the same reality that Gideon Levy faced. Hey, Jamal, we have about 7 or 8 minutes left, and I just wanted to bring your attention to a couple of things. We had the meeting of the century to solve the problem of Palestine in Bahrain last week or a week and a half ago. And I'm happy to report that since that groundbreaking meeting, that absolutely nothing has changed for the question and the problem of Palestine. Nothing has changed except a worsening situation for Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank and in 1948. The meeting ended without anything of any substance whatsoever. And given the predictable news cycle, we know that absolutely nothing is going to happen until after possibly more elections. We see what happens with Benjamin Netanyahu. But I'm very happy to report that Jared Kushner's deal of the century has been an absolute, unmitigated, complete failure at this time.
It was totally a failure across the Middle East. It has been reported as such. Of course, some of those who attended and participated, they tried to put a spin on it. The U.S. ambassador to Israel tried to put a spin on it. Greenblatt tried to put a spin on it. Jared Kushner's team tried to put a spin on it. But, you try to shine it as many times, they try to whitewash it and whatever, and they know that they have failed. And they didn't find any buyers. Basically, here's the joke, and we'll talk about the joke, but I wanted first quickly, because I know we're running out of time, the article by Gideon Levy in the Haaretz was published May 25th of this year, and the title of it is Gideon Levy took a DNA test and found out the truth about his ancestors' link to Israel. It's a long title, but all I have to do with that, and you read it's very important article, it's very entertaining. But here is the deal, Jess. So the deal of the century, they came and they said, okay, we're going to put on the table $70 million and $1 billion, sorry. And Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, they all have also a share out of that. They don't get equal shares to the Palestinians. Nevertheless, they're going to eat about $30 billion out of this. So leaving the Palestinians with $40 billion over 10 years. Over 10 years. You should read the fine print.
I did.
This is in projects. So over 10 years, basically $40 billion. Do the math, right? So how much is that? How much is that?
That's about $400 million a year.
Yeah, it's peanuts. Peanuts. They want Palestinians to buy into this farce of a deal, sell their land, accept everything else that Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel dictated on them, to live under occupation. And the simple answer to them, Jess, listen, there are 13 million Palestinians across the globe, plus or minus some. If every Palestinian donated $7.7 per month, they can give the United States $100 billion over 10 years. I'm serious. Somebody should do the math. Somebody actually did the math about it. It's an insult.
It's insulting.
It's ridiculous.
Well,
and then they're surprised that no one is buying into it.
Well, no one's buying into it. No one will buy into it. Jared Kushner is a fraud. He's a fake. He's a fraudster. And I think the only plus about this, Jamal, is that the reality about Jared Kushner was laid bare before the international community in terms of his complete ineptness and his complete ignorance about everything as it relates. We've got a few minutes left. Jamal, I want to let our listeners know, in the midst of all the chaos that's happening in Washington, in the midst of all the gridlock between the Senate, the House, and the White House, in the midst of all the paralysis between the executive branch and the legislative branch, the House is trying to do something, Jamal. They're trying to put forth House Resolution 246 because this is the new anti-BDS legislation that the House is trying to put forward. They can get nothing else done, Jamal. Democrats and Republicans cannot agree on anything, but it appears that some Democrats and some Republicans are able, with the help of AIPAC and apparently the White House, are able to put together this House Resolution Bill 246, which is essentially going to be the new improved version of the anti-BDS legislation that is going to be going forth through the Senate. It's going to delegitimize the use of BDS in order to criminalize anybody and any organization that uses the anti-apartheid movement methodology, the nonviolent anti-apartheid methodology used in liberating South Africa. It's going to make the same thing illegal for Americans or American companies to utilize basically the same principles. So stay tuned, Jamal. We're going to be reporting on that as it winds its way through the House.
Well, they've been trying and trying again to pass these different laws, and both on, of course, this is on the federal level, but on the state level, some of them have failed. We're seeing similar things happening in Europe, in Germany, for example.
Oh, really?
Germany passed laws, and I think eventually these things can be all challenged as far as the United States in the Supreme Court, and they will lose.
Of course. And Ed, we welcome that. But, Jamal, we've run out of time for the day. We appreciate the fact that our Arab Talk correspondent and co-host Jamal Dajani has stayed up past midnight to continue the reportage on Arab Talk here, Jamal. We really appreciate it. We're going to continue this discussion next week, but we're going to post our shows on Facebook, on YouTube, and of course at our website so that you can podcast it at arabtalk.com. But thank you all for listening, and thank you, Jamal.
Our website, arabtalkradio.com.
arabtalkradio.com.
And subscribe for free
to
all of our podcasts.
And have a good evening, Jamal, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Okay.